get started. We have a lot to talk about, and I want you all to also have time for questions. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I am yelling a little bit. I'm very pleased to introduce Otto von Busch, who will be speaking on proximity to power, craft capabilities, and material empowerment in the Craftwork of William S. Coperthwaite. We're very fortunate at Bard Graduate Center to have Otto here as a visiting fellow this spring. He's Associate Professor of Integrated Design at Parsons School of Design, where he also oversees the Alternative Fashion Strategies minor. He holds a PhD from the School of Design and Craft at the University of Gothenburg, Sweden, where he specialized in fashion design research. Before coming to Parsons, he was Professor of Textile Design at Konstfack University in Stockholm. I have more to say, but we just discussed my not saying it now so that there's more time. So I'll just go on to say that Professor von Busch has lectured and published widely in his field, and these articles have appeared in journals such as Critical Studies in Fashion and Beauty, Textile, the Journal of Cloth and Culture, and the Journal of Modern Craft. His work is also featured in edited volumes such as Design as Future Making and Craftivism, the Art of Craft and Activism. And also in acclaimed anthologies on design research, sustainability in fashion, and others. I do want to mention two of Professor von Busch's ongoing endeavors, Self-Passages and Room Services. Self-Passage is an artistic endeavor, fashion brand, and research practice. And you have a show coming up in March. And
at the new school, at the Parsons Gallery, yes.
Yeah. And Room Services is a research institute for practice-based and experimental design projects in collaboration with urban planner Evren User. Okay. And you can read about these online, and it's self-passage, all one word, .info, okay? And Room Services, with an S, all one word, .org. So thank you, Otto, for giving this talk. We're
Thank
really
you for
excited
having me. It's a fantastic pleasure to be here. It's really exciting for me to come to Bard Graduate Center. I mean, I studied art history almost 15, 20 years ago, so it's like really exciting to come back because I've been in design for so long, and there you work differently, and you're not of course we work with stuff, but it's very much fantasizing about the future of stuff rather than actually get into the nitty-grittiness of histories and exciting things. Yes, so I'm, my journey has been, I started out with a dream of becoming a luthier, a guitar builder. So I studied crafts when I was in my early 20s, and then worked in the summers building guitars and this kind of stuff and restoring guitars. And then I went into cabinet making, and then by detour into university. And I didn't really think that was going to be my stuff, but in a sense it was fun. So I found a little niche, and I went into design. And that's how things came together. And I focused on fashion design because had been doing pattern making, remaking stuff. And it became my thesis, which was called Fashionable. And my idea was what would fashionability be, rather than thinking that we sell fashionable stuff in a sense. What would the role of a fashion designer be if we were educating our users and trying to make the user thinking of fashion as an ability, fashion as a way of being with things rather than something that we buy and wear and discard. But I thought of it as a public making, as a DIY practice. Why is it we lock up fashion into the studios and mystify these designers and idolize them, and then we spend our hard-earned money on them having a good time designing for us, and then we we are the ones who suffer through our everyday life, but we do the fun part is for them. So how could the pleasures of creation and of attraction and what the magics of fashion could be, how could they be more publicly disseminated? So that was the idea behind this work, and I was very much inspired by hacktivism, because this is 15 years ago now, so there was an idea that new media and hacking meant something else then. Hacking was something that was a grassroots thing, that was a little bit subversive at the same time it was constructive. It wasn't undermining things in the same way, and it wasn't about politics in the same way as it is today. And not also about entrepreneurship, as a hackathon today means a way to innovate and to bring people together around wicked problems or this kind of stuff. It's a very buzzy thing. not at all having to do with like anarchist squats and people imagining totally different futures in a way. So I sort of have a sort of, it was a way of trying to deal, in a sense of you can say, sort of William Morris's and John Ruskin's old idea that craft had a sort of a utopian practice and hacking was a sort of a more sort of contemporary way perhaps of trying to sort of figure out the same ideals. And similarly, the idea here also was that hacking was another thing than sort of the 68-ish type of resistance. It wasn't about sabotage. It wasn't about dropping out. It was about plugging into the system, trying to figure out how does the system work? How can it sort of be bended rather than sort of throwing gravel in the machine and trying to stop the machine in order to produce a utopia somewhere else. But of course now this seems a little naive, and the interesting part for me is trying to sort of revisit a little of what could craft do, and the ideas that I had 50 years ago, and what would it sort of mean today, and especially looking at a sort of a material practice where not necessarily fashion is in the focus, but more about different types of practices. Of course, this is not something new, and I will sort of just run through a few old examples of this. We have Friedrich Fröbel, the founder of the kindergarten movement, with this idea that we can only understand the world if we're actually able to produce it. The whole idea of education is to make education and knowledge tangible for the kids. The idea that we live a richer life if we're sort of able to touch and take apart the world and then reassemble it in a way. It's not something that is happening far away by experts, etc., or knowledge produced by the Greeks or something like that. It's something that we can deal with now, and to live a rich life is to somehow try to sort of touch the world and become part of it in that way. This also was the foundation of the sort of the Sloyd movement in the Scandinavian countries at the end of the 19th century. That became a big sort of export thing of the Scandinavian countries, of Uno Signeus from Finland, and also Otto Salomon, who ran the seminar at Näs outside Gothenburg, educating teachers from all across the world in this kind of the virtues, in a sense, of a hands-on education. And of course, this is also when the sort of the public schooling systems emerged around the planet, you can say, and also there, instead of only figuring out that we should learn to read and write and these kind of things, which critics said was a way to also just produce another type of alienated class. We instigate schooling systems in order to produce good workers for the factories. You learn to come in time, you learn to read the manual and obey orders, and you learn to perhaps service a machine if it breaks. And that's basically what public education, many critics said. So a lot of the Sloyd education was also an idea that we shouldn't alienate, knowledge shouldn't alienate people. Knowledge should be a way to anchor people in the world and produce a sort of a sense of independence in that way. So there's always this tension between a sort of an idealism in craft education and a very sort of instrumental, not necessarily capitalist serving, but sort of societal serving idea of what practical knowledge does. And of course, if we look at Gustav Larsson, a student of Otto Salomon, who came here to America and worked at the Sloyd School in Boston, who is the Bennett School.
Yeah, North Bennett School.
Exactly. Who wrote and translated a lot of Otto Salomon's work into English and wrote this about whittling and these kind of, and it's also fascinating because in Sweden and the Scandinavian system, the first thing you would learn was, for example, to use a whittling knife. The first part of Sloyd education was to learn to whittle. Whereas in England, that was considered too low. So the first thing you would use was a chisel. Because it's only robbers and thieves and peasants that use knives. The real carpenters, they use. So there's all these tensions about how this was appropriate in different language and cultures. But the idea, as Otto Salomon and Gustav Larsson says, there's also an ethical imperative in making. There's an idea that making will make us good people. If we only work with our hands and become crafters, there's some idea that inside of us, there's all a nice little whittler that just want to sit there and do nice things, And I think this is fascinating because I think a lot of the craft revival we see today, a lot of craftivism and all these things, and craft activism, all these things that are say the sort of the craft revival today also has the same kind of virtuous idea that craft is per se, if it's craft beer or craft sausage, wherever you go in Brooklyn, there's always craft, you know, and it's used as a marketing tool, and it basically just means good, you know. So how do we sort of get away from it? How can we sort of nuance what this craft is, and how do we sort of look at what it can do? And me as a design teacher, and I think this is an interesting part for so many of my students are having an idea that design is something not only about making stuff that's going to sell, you know, because it's unsustainable, but design is going to somehow empower people, you know, it's going to make people be able to do some sort of thing in the world, you know, and that usually is also virtuous in their mind, you know. So how do we sort of deal with these capabilities that people have? And exactly the capabilities approach is something that I've been using when I try to look at this, and from Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum, who argue that the idea of capabilities is sort of a philosophical idea of how we can conceive what justice is. You know, that we shouldn't think about, I mean, Amartya Sen's famous book, Development as Freedom, that we shouldn't think that sort of international development or a developed country only means that we can buy more stuff, or that we can have a higher GDP, or that people have a longer life expectancy, or something like that, you know. But development means that we have capabilities to do certain things in society. So a higher developed country is a freer society in the sense that people are able to do things. They are not repressed, but also they don't live in a poverty where nothing is possible because they don't have any means in order to sort of do what they wish to do. So his idea is that the ability to do things is at the center of the idea of what we're able, what a freedom, what a free society is, and what a, you know, being a free agent, live a rich life means that you're able to touch and do and change things. So I've been playing with this idea with my students that, you know, how do we explore, how big is your world? You know, can you say that my world is as big as that I can change? You know, I can change a little how I reach things with my body. You know, when I'm a teenager, I have my room and I post stuff on the walls, and it's like I lock the door for my parents. This is my space, you know. And my parents come in there and say, like, Otto, clean up your room, you know. So there's like a struggle about whose space is this? How big is my world, you know? And perhaps if I have a house, it goes all the way out to the fence, and that's where I sort of have responsibility, etc., you know. And then comes public space. Out there, it's not really my space, but we have to sort of vote and do complicated social protocols in order to sort of change it. But, you know, my reach is as far as I have agency in the world, you know. And I mean, of course, the prison is the most extreme environment where I'm not free to do anything, you know. So, and usually then, as designers, we take for granted that this freedom or this ability to change the world comes with buying stuff that makes me able to do things. You know, and the more money I have, the more agency I have, the larger my world becomes. I have a private jet, and I have, you know, I can sort of reach further into the world, you know. But so how can we sort of balance this? How can we think as designers about what can we do? What are these action spaces we have in the world? You know? But of course, they immediately clash with other people because these skills are controversial, you know. I'm not, you know, my freedom somehow can infringe on your freedom, etc., etc. So where does it, you know, what are the controversies around this? And when we then talk about craft activism and these kind of things, you know, what are really the issues that are at stake? What are these boundaries that we somehow are in sort of trespassing or working with or trying to sort of touch power or at least come to a proximity to power in that sense? So just to sort of come back, you know, so Christopher Frayling writes about this in his book on craftsmanship and sort of looking back at the Luddites, for example. You know, the Luddites were not anti-technology as much as they were for control, meaning that they wanted to have control over their own labor, which is also something that Glenn Adamson is touching upon in both the Craft Reader and in the invention of crafts, in the sense that, you know, so much of industrialism has been about trying to control the agency of the workers because they can immediately just stop working or they can start doing the wrong thing or whatever, you know. So Taylorism and all these kind of things are like engineering paradigms that tries to sort of make sure that craftspeople, crafts artisans do what they're told to do because we have a higher idea of what an efficient working industry or machine is. So what is the struggle then between the people who are then having this agency and who tells them what to do? You know, where does these kind of the struggles between exactly my skill, my action spaces versus how am I controlled? So what I've been trying to sort of look at is so where does sort of these DIY practices or craft practices, do they exist in some sort of continuum, in a sense, between this idea of self-reliance and production of autonomy, this kind of dropping out, build my own house in Walden, and there I'm going to make my own food or whatever, these kind of ideas of some sort of independence. And of course, these are all ideals. There's very rarely people actually, Thoreau actually did not do everything. I need to do this, And then, of course, we can see it sort of on an axis all the way into sort of what maker culture is today. But perhaps started 10, 15 years ago with an idea that it was sort of a reinvention of crafts for today, but has become this kind of very explicitly an entrepreneurial machine, where, I am a prosumer, also 15 years, when that there was a liberation idea that being a producing consumer could actually, I didn't need to become passive. Today, prosumer basically means that I'm buying microprocessors and I'm buying other sort of tools. I'm going to Home Depot and I'm building my own workshop at home, which I never use. So there's another type of sort of consumerism in that sense, And if we look at the writings of the Byung-Chul Han, for example, his ideas of burnout society and achievement society, that we don't live under sort of the Freudian, Foucaultian, repressed societies that we all are forced to read about in school, Today, we live in a sort of totally neoliberal world where nothing is forbidden. There's no big father that, state saying no. It's the opposite. It says yes all the time, We are not neurotic and psychotic because we're so repressed and rather, we are burnt out or depressed because we haven't been ourselves enough. We haven't produced enough. So does maker culture actually produce an even more sort of, I need to, I'm not only buying stuff, I need to produce stuff. I need to invent my own. If I haven't invented little or written my own program, who am I? I'm just a passive consumer. Otto, who do you think you are? You need to achieve something, write your own code, build your own house, whatever, Otherwise, you're not really fulfilled, are you? So where is this struggle between my own agency today? Can we even use Morris and Ruskin and these kind of ideals of craft in a way in a society today that is so, based on that we need to continuously perform, need to continuously build our own place and author ourselves and continuously write ourselves, etc. So that's, so what is these tensions? And this is all very early to me too, so I'm just sort of throwing things out there because I'm hoping to have some time to sort of pick this apart here in the coming months. Okay, so where I've been trying to sort of look at or think where hacking then exists is sort of between craft and a more systemic issue, if you want to say so. Craft is this kind of very hands-on intervention, touching the world, this sort of Froebel idea, exactly, I cannot understand the world if I don't touch it. But there's also sort of a systemic approach. It allows me, the hack somehow gets into the system somehow. It's not only about repainting or building a porch. A hack is somehow trying to understand what works behind the firewall or the, inside the lock or whatever, some sort of hidden things. It's a breaking apart of the black box of some sort. I'm supposed to be have hands off, but the hack is something that trespasses, So in every hack, there is a sort of a crack. Traditionally, hackers would say that, hackers are the ones that build things, crackers are the ones that destroy things, But in every hack, there is also a little crack, and that's where the light gets in, as Leonard Cohen would say, But sort of, how do we sort of balance these issues? Where does craft become something that does more than sort of a DIY IKEA building furniture or something like that? And I use the example of Gandhis Saltmarsh as perhaps the prime hack in that sense, Meaning that in 1930, he starts the salt satyagraha where they walk to the seaside to make their own salt. The British were doing their own salt but having a tax on salt where every Indian citizen had to pay then taxes to their occupiers. And Gandhi argued, well, we need to disobey this, and go and make our own salt, which of course is the same salt as what the British were doing. It's just that it's untaxed. So, you know, because the British were taking it out of the Indian Ocean, so just like Gandhi argued the Indians should be doing. And of course, so the interesting part is that what this kind of DIY salt does is that it breaks the law, you know, but it also produces the same salt. Here's one salt crystal from the British, here's one salt crystal that you have made, but as you make it yourself, you touch Indian independence. You make Indian independence, because it's the same thing, but without the British power, you know. And according to Gandhi too, I mean, the British could stay, but they could just not be in power, you know. So this whole idea that it's basically the same thing, it's the same kind of society, but without, you know, power in that sense, you know. So, and of course it's illegal, so there's a sort of a trespassing. There is a challenge of the law or something like that, you know. So it's a making that is having, of course, a strategic goal of independence, but also sort of it challenges the border, you know. So much of craftivism today, I feel, is not really, what is it defined against? What is it really trying to challenge? Where are the sort of the boundaries that it's trying to sort of, where does it aim? What does it do? So I'm thinking, so to me this is a prime example of a hack in the sense that it has a strategic goal, it has a sort of a systemic approach, you know, thinking about tax law, etc., you know, and it's hands-on, you know, it tries to really touch what it does, you know. So I'm playing with this idea, and this is totally fresh. This is this is really what I would love to have your feedback on later. So could we say that there's a sense of statecraft versus civiccraft? Is there sort of a statecraft in the sense of how the state, and states could also be laws, guilds, etc., you know, but those who control what capabilities we are allowed to use, versus, if we want to say top-down, not necessarily top-down, but this is sort of, you know, what action spaces does the state allow, versus what action spaces do the civics or people in a community want to do that they think can further a good society in that sense, you know. And is there a tension between these two? And some things are allowed and some things are less allowed, you know, or some things are challenging in certain times and totally legal today, for example, you know. So is there a boundary between these two, and how does that work? And I will just give some examples that fascinate me, and I'm trying to sort of figure out how that works. So Glenn Adamson starts the invention of craft with the picking of the Brahma lock at the World Exhibit in London, and he argues that, or how Glenn Adamson has posited is also on a metaphorical level, you know, that first of all, the crafters are, you know, outwitting the engineers who have planned, you know, and have made a great invention that it should be impossible to hack, you know. It also has, of course, you know, political consequences, meaning that the British supremacy of the world is also challenged by an American locksmith, that a former colony comes in to sort of, you know, prove his independence, also by outwitting exactly the engineerings of the brilliant minds of the domineering British in that sense. But he argues exactly that there's always that manipulative power of crafts, because it's always a little bit uncalculable. It can sort of sneak in. There's always room for maneuver in a way that crafts can do, that hands can outwit, you know, our smartest systems, in a sense, you know. So what is the sort of the tension around that? And I've been going to, so when I wrote my thesis, I went a lot to hacker conferences in Europe at the time. And almost every night at these hacker conferences, they were lockpicking workshops. And this has a long tradition, because also at MIT, where the MIT Hackers Club started, they also started as lockpickers. And rumors, you know, the grand narrative is that they tried to sort of access the computer labs, which, remember, when computers were really rare, in order to sort of test their programs in the nighttime when the school was closed. So the lockpicking was sort of an inherent part of the very sort of hacker mentality of gaining access to machines and spreading that knowledge to everyone who is an interested people, or, you know, in computering and these kind of things. So there's zillions of ways. There's a famous MIT hacker manuals, etc. And there's a huge, many different groups across the planet. There's Tools. Tool is the international organization with 3 O's, and they have a New York chapter too. They meet every month, and at different hacker spaces usually, and where you can sort of try different techniques of hacking. When I went to this conference in Berlin, you were encouraged to make your own lockpick. I brought a few things here. So basically, what this German guy taught me was it's really good to use the street sweeping machines. When you know those metal rods that they drop at the street, you find them on the ground all the time. They're very good to make lockpicks out of. You just sort of file down one side, and then you use two. I mean, you can use whatever, but two popsicle sticks, whatever, you know, and then just some gaffer tape around to sort of make a good handle. I'll send this around later, and you can try out on some. When I started, there were also these locks that were basically just filed away. It's a little hard to see here, but you can see and practice on the lock because they file down the sides so that you can see the pins move and sort of as you practice. But today it's like you can buy them on Amazon, and they're totally made out of acrylic, so you can see all the workings inside of the lock. So it's this development of lock picking out there is getting more and more accessible. And I mean, it's fun too. But the funny part, or the exciting part, was that this guy, the teacher there, was also saying that, well, you know, when I come here flying, you know, usually in the X-ray, these guard, whatever, the people at the X-ray machine at the airport will be like, oh, what are you doing? What are your stuff here in your backpack? And he says, well, and it's so hard to convince them that I'm interested in locks and not in doors. You know? And I think there's something fascinating there about what the hacking does in the sense, you know, that it's not necessarily about, I mean, there's so many easier ways to break into a flat or whatever if you want to steal things. You don't stand there lock picking usually, you know. So there's a fascination with the system itself, and there's the idea that there's a challenge that the system does, and how do I sort of, you know, match myself against that, you know. So that's something that really fascinates me around it, and we'll come back to that. Another part is, of course, moonshining, which is also a classic of these kind of home crafts that are very sort of contested around the state. You know, everybody, it's extremely simple to make your own moonshine just in your kitchen. You just make a little mash and let it yeast for a few days, or you know, to produce a certain kind of alcohol. Then you just turn it, or you put a pot or a little bowl inside, and you turn the lid upside down and put some ice on it. And as it reaches 80 degrees Celsius, the alcohol will evaporate, hit the ice, and run down on the inside, and you made your own 96% alcohol. You know, it's extremely simple to make your own booze in that sense. And of course, there's like, you know, different reflux machines and stuff to make it more pure, etc., etc. And there's a whole craft around this, and it's fascinating. I have a few friends that have been trying this out, and it's a fascinating craft. And of course, it's a TV show, these kind of moonshiners, etc. If you want to sort of go for that romanticism too. But you can also buy the whole kits on Amazon, you know. So there's nothing dramatic around what moonshining does. And at least in Sweden, there's a big outrage right now, or over the last years, in the moonshining community, because you can buy so cheap Polish liquor that it's almost more expensive to buy your own sugar to make your own than actually buying the Polish ready-made stuff, you know. So it's like it's so just like William Morris would argue that craft is dying, you know, it's also moonshining dying. It's like a crisis of craft everywhere all the time, you know. Yeah, we don't have to go there. But exactly. But the whole idea is exactly that, you know, who challenges who, you know, where are the boundaries around that? For most people, I mean, moonshining is not necessarily bad, but if you sell it to kids, perhaps, you know, so it's like, you know, what does this agency do? Where does it sort of challenge which morals, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, you know, so I studied, I mean, we have shop class in Sweden. All the Scandinavian countries have shop class, you know. And when I grew up, there was a struggle about, you know, we were locked out of our classrooms because we were not supposed to spend the breaks inside the classrooms, and it was cold outside. You were like, why are we supposed to be out here in the rain, etc. You know. So everybody tried to figure out ways to get access to the classrooms, you know. And my brother taught me very quickly that if you just take a wire hanger and you just make a hook and you hammer it a little, you can actually reach into the lock and sort of open it, you know. So I made that in my shop class and got very popular in class because I could open the door to the classroom, you know. But also, of course, like most of the boys in shop class were doing baseball bats or ninja stars, you know. So that was basically, you know, so this whole idea that as soon as you're offered the ability to do things, why is it that there's this challenge, you know, there's something fascinating with weapons, the sort of that type of agency. We were not doing like birdhouses and these kind of things, So in a way, what is it that is so tempting, as we have the ability to do things, to also do the controversial stuff? And then examples of this is Evan Booth's idea of, so now with our increased security at airports, what sort of, are all weapons taken away from the airplanes or not? Or how does this work? And his idea is like, could we use the souvenir stores to sort of figure out ways to produce our own weapons after the security checks, So he's been making these different weapons of stuff he buys at the souvenir stores inside the airports, and see sort of, how to sort of best produce your weapons, So he has a whole site of different fantastic inventions, But of course, this is, the whole idea, and it is this challenge. It is fun because he uses these kind of props that everybody sees, and he uses it for something dangerous that we know we shouldn't be doing. And so, it resonates really well with the sort of the old shop class things that we were trying to do, in a sense, But of course, it becomes really much more controversial when we come to the 3D printed guns of Defense Distributed, for example. This organization here in the States that very quickly infiltrated, if you want to say, Thingiverse, which is this 3D printing database where you can download stuff for your 3D printer, and they very quickly started producing weapons that you can, or parts of weapons that you can 3D print at home. As soon as you have your little maker bot, you can make your own. So this gun, the Liberator, the only metal part is the very sort of the little pin that actually hits the bullet, and it can fire really well. So you can actually produce your own weapons at home. This was really controversial, and they first distributed them all online, but now you have to order it on a USB stick, so it's not actually available for download, but they send you a USB stick with the files on if you send them an email. And now, just a year ago, they produced the Ghost Gunner, which is a metal routing machine, where you then can produce your own AR-15 lower at home, which is the central part that holds the AR-15 together, because all the other parts are legal. You can buy any other parts and just ship them around America. But the lower is the one that is the crucial part that has the serial number and things. So if you produce it yourself, it becomes untraceable, and et cetera, et cetera. So if you want to say so, from the little playful ninja star and baseball bats and birdhouses, making has this, so where are these boundaries? Because many of us would agree that weapons are not necessarily what we should be doing. Whereas, of course, what Defense Distributed argues, well, it's our constitutional right, et cetera, too. So where does the state have power to interfere? Where does ethics go? Where do these kind of lines go? That it's easy today to talk about the Saltmarsh as an epitome, or as a landmark in craftivism. But how does that differ from what Defense Distributed are doing? What are the virtues that they're trying to support? What are the ways to understand what craft and these abilities allow us to do? It's very safe for designers. When my students, well, the market takes care of this. The market has regulations, and as long as I work within what is illegal on the market, I don't need to take any sort of ethical responsibilities. But how is that really so? So how can we better understand what these tensions are around? So this is where William Coperthwaite comes in, because in his little book about Simple Life, he argues for a social design, a sort of a democratic craft. His idea was that the trouble today is that we lock away crafts into museums, into certain schools. How can we imagine that craft becomes an inherent part of a democratic life? That we can actually, craft should be an inspiration and not something that we idolize and sort of put away into museums as these kind of unusable things, rather, Yeah, I'll hurry up on this. Okay, let's just move on. Okay, true democracy is about making things. Okay, and of course he's famous for yurt building, because his idea was that yurt is a cheap house that is easy to do, and we can basically all build our own house. So a fantastic way of not getting into mortgage, not into supporting different kind of alienating industries. Can we sort of reclaim where we spend most of our lives and where we most of our expenses, etc. and make our habitat are really a part of our democratic imperative in that sense. He also started producing what he called democratic tools, because his idea was that, could we also produce ways of imagining what democratic tools is? A democratic axe is not something where I need to become a blacksmith to make it, but could there be ways of us to actually feel that we can make not only our own house, but the tools that make the house too? So how can we sort of have a embrace making really in its fullest potential as a sort of a democratic crafts? And he also had ideas of democratic chairs in the sense of, what would be the simplest type of chair to make that could be a way to take control of your own seating in that sense. Of course, there's many different people that have been working with this. Ezio Autoproiezione is perhaps the most famous example that has been along in the Milan furniture fair and these kind of things. But still, this idea that DIY practice has a sort of a civic component. So this is where I sort of, so if we can say sort of Coperthwaite on one end of a very sort of idealistic civic idea that craft can do, and then perhaps we have that sort of statecraft and the control of guns or whatever, there's a tension between these poles around, what can we do, where are these challenging boundaries? Right. So this is where I'm trying to figure things out, How could these things be taken apart? What could be the examples of this? That tailoring is a classic example of especially women in medieval times in cities producing their own clothes, even though they were or producing clothes, but even though they were not part of the guilds, that was an illegal activity because you had to be in the guild in order to produce clothes. So there was a lot of sort of sentences or court cases around women being sued for making clothes in medieval times. And of course they're challenging sumptuary laws at the time, which of course is also like copyrights today is basically our time's sumptuary laws, where we try to sort of, or exclusive brands try to make sure that the poor people cannot access the looks of the rich. So instead of having a sumptuary law, you call it copyrights instead. So there's just a transition of where the power is and where the moral imperative lies on the law. Moonshining, set against growing of weed, etc. Because of course alcohol is legal. It's not an illegal drug, but it's the illegality of it is who's allowed to produce it and who taxes it. So not necessarily that all production of drugs and it's also So I'm trying to sort of figure out sort away some of the ethical issues, but at the same time lift up where it comes closest to the making process itself. And then, of course, we also come to hacking, and especially then 10, 15 years ago, this idea that hacking was sort of automatically democratic, whereas, of course, today it is also waged by states or against the public, etc. And also, exactly, it's also that crafts are not necessarily illegal per se. It's like weapon production is really fine as long as the state does it. Hacking is really fine as long as NSA does it. etc. So it's like, who has access to these capabilities and who does something with it. Exactly, America is allowed to influence elections overseas, but not the, So it's just sort of, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy in this, and how do they claim what they do as a virtue versus the other agents. And of course this, and defense distributed in the end, call their weapons program wiki weapons, in the sense that it should be sort of as open as sort of a Wikipedia in the sense, but for arms production, because that is a constitutional right. So where does that become wrong in that sense? Where are sort of certain kind of rights against? Where does the ethics and exactly empirical studies show that it may not be good, etc. So this is a little where I'm heading, and I'm trying to figure out what would be good historical examples and historical items, in a sense, that have been sort of at the focus point of these kind of legal challenges in that sense. Because it's easy running away exactly now showing defense distributed from today or hacking from today, but of course these are not new things. So I'm really trying to sort of, what could be a handful of example of objects where these controversies have materialized in, and also they have really become markers of where does the agency of the citizen, how large space does the citizen have versus the state or versus law versus other citizens, in a sense, and how are these regulated over time and how can we better understand where these controversial lines are, and also bringing it back for me as a designer to my students, thinking about, so when you talk about empowerment, how do you know what empowerment you're talking about? Where does that help your consumer or your participant to bring their freedom, their capability to do and be and live a rich life, and how does it collide with our other ethical issues around the world, etc., but that's sort of where I'm imagining this heading, and it's very new, or this latest part is a very fresh thing, but I really hope to have the time here at Art to sort of figure this out, and I'm all eager to hear your ideas, and come knock on my door or send me an email if you have brilliant ideas, or also not brilliant ideas, that's also fine. But or if you want to come over and practice some lockpicking, or if you have a special moonshining machine at home or something you want to show, whatever. That's yes. Okay. Well, thank you, guys.
Oh, thank you. So we have some time for questions.
Oh, hi. Okay.
Yeah. Over there and there.
Up.
No.
I was speaking of your question, I'm looking for historical examples of this, and particularly with the sumptuary legislation. There's some really interesting evidence of how sumptuary laws, I work on 16th and 17th century Spain, how there, the conventionalism has always been, well, first of all, the sumptuary laws were never actually enforced, which is why they were always repeated, which I don't think is accurate. But also then that they were kind of paradoxically, that they were detrimental to the economy. They were like a really negative thing. But some really interesting evidence, I think, is coming up that sumptuary laws were actually kind of one of the driving forces behind fashion innovations. And you can find some really interesting examples of this, like in the 1550s in Spain, certain kinds of decorative trimmings were outlawed, made out of silk. And the law is just incredibly detailed about exactly what's outlawed, what width of ribbons are permitted and what aren't. And in response to this, then the tailors started using very expensive, very fragile trimmings made out of wool. And so a few months later, there's a new law issue that says, okay, now you can't use wool trimmings either, right? And so there's this kind of tug of war going on. And what I love about that document is it says, because of the malice of the artisans. So there's some more examples I'd be happy to share with you if that's the kind of thing you're working on.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think clothing is not dangerous, So I think that's very sort of it's good to. That's really where I want to start, because I think most of us, I mean, home sewing is not killing the fashion industry, etc., etc. So it's not, it's most of us agree that is good, So I would really love to sort of start with the virtuous side of your own. Yes. But thank you. Yes.
Sure. I guess my question was about gender, because almost until you mentioned clothing at the end, I think for all of your examples were male makers and doers, and yet at the other hand, the common understanding of craft has long been, maybe I'm wrong about this, but it's in popular imagination often associated with women's work. So I'm just wondering if gender fits into your project and where you might take it, or is it, don't you think it's relevant to the conversation?
Oh, I mean, yeah. I'm working on a little thing, or a chapter where I start also with the pussy hat, and I think it's also I'm also damaged by that I'm seeking perhaps danger in this project. So I think that's also why I'm being a little. It's also a design school. Problem, you can say, because if you go to design school show, you can almost say that every project that has to do with hospitals is the women's final project, and then you have all the cars and things, and so there's a very sort of I haven't come upon that yet. So I'm very it's yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
something to think about it.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Thanks. Yes.
Have you seen the 4-part documentary about Coperthwaite?
No, I haven't. No.
Do you know anyone who's seen it?
I've only seen part of it. I mean, part of something on YouTube, and most of it is not the whole thing. So
that would be a great thing to access. It seems like just to buy it costs $600, which is a little exorbitant for
Yeah, we talked
home
about
entertainment. But it'd be great to
about
screen it somewhere, or screen at least the springtime one, which is supposed to be the iconic.
Yeah.
If you're only going to see one of the 4 seasons, the spring is supposed to be the one.
Okay. No, because I'm in contact with Peter Foster, which was one of his collaborators, who now runs the residency in the yurt. You know, and that is there's a little craft prize also that they do together with a Swedish whittler that I've been in contact with for many years, Jörgen Sundqvist. So I'm trying to figure out a way to then get access also, because apparently also his stuff is left in his yurt, and people can come there and live in his yurt and use his thing, you know.
That's
So I hope to get there. Yes, but thank you.
Keep us surprised.
Is that the Anna Grimshaw?
Yes.
Yeah. We talked about acquiring that, actually, and I don't know whether we did because of the cost, but I will check. Because it was something that Aaron Klaas and I were interested in.
It doesn't seem to be in the New York Public Library.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I do.
Okay, then it's not in there.
Yes.
I just wanted to draw you out on something you just said, which was that home sewing is not destroying the fashion industry. And I was thinking about this throughout your talk. I wanted to hear you talk maybe a bit about fashion revolution, which I think is a very interesting movement because it does have a lot of different kinds of sites of controversy and sort of pushback to waste and labor. It's involved in craft, and it seems particularly individualized because a lot of the issues around people's bodies and fitting to the body and these sorts of things. And of course it's also very like self-performative in this way that you were kind of talking about, this like burnout culture and the need to self-perform. So I just wonder how fashion revolution fits into this picture that you're thinking about.
And I don't really know, because I think this is a little my safe haven escaping from fashion, if you want to say so. You know, that's what fascinates me with these things. So perhaps that's also why, you know, it's. I mean, I have perhaps have my own. I mean, I teach fashion and sustainability classes at Parsons, and I think, to me, a trouble, and it also comes back to the hacking thesis I did many years ago, where this idea that we can hack the system, if fashion is an operating system, we can sort of hack into it, we can make it open source, etc., etc. And I just realized after so many years working on this that it still takes the system for granted, that the system is there. There is something we call the fashion industry and the fashion system, and we should just make it sustainable in some way, etc. And I felt like I had locked myself into, or painted myself into the corner, that the longer I keep talking about sustainability as if we're only going to save this industry, you know, because I think the main question around that is that what do we want to sustain with fashion? What is it that should be sustained? The celebrity culture? The fast consumerism? What is it that should be sustained when we talk about sustainable fashion? You know, and I think that is the trouble with I'm seeing with Fashion Revolution and so many of these initiatives, or a movie like True Cost, you know, if you've seen it, it's like many other of these issues where they sort of unmask the fashion industry. It's just a little bit more sort of MTV-ish with cool music and more blood in it, because it's a little bit more cruel, if you want to say so. At the same time, the recurrent image is like Black Friday, you know, people storming the stores and tearing, you know, clothes, you know, and then the poor people sewing these clothes overseas.
Yeah.
And it's poor people here that we blame for the suffering of poor people over there. You know, there's always that sort of, you know, what are these ideals that we can, you know, that we strive for? You know, what is it inside fashion that we need to question on a much more deeper level than sustaining an industry that already now perhaps is not necessarily supporting the full richest life that it could be doing, in a sense, you know. So I think I'm trying to challenge my students to sort of, how can we get beyond that and see how can fashion be something that is a much richer experience, that celebrates our togetherness and our flirting and all these affirmative energies that we have in social life, that is not necessarily materialized in eco-cotton and ethical production and these kinds of, you know, could we figure out ways of being with clothes and fashion that is much richer and much more healthy for all of us, in that sense, you know, but just at a wider interface. Why is it we funnel everything into fashion, into these commodities, and they are sold when I'm having a low blood sugar and I'm walking there out of school at Parsons, oh my God, here's Forever 21, should I have a coffee or a Snickers, or should I go and buy a t-shirt? And it's like, you know, because so much is fueled on this that, oh, I have a bad day or I have a job interview tomorrow. You know, there's something that is such a primitive level by which we engage in our everyday consumption of fashion. How could it be much more richer as a spiritual practice? But you know, so many of these sustainable initiatives only look at the symptoms and don't look at where.
Maybe I'm thinking also of like Kate Fletcher's work and like how much she talks about like people reusing and readopting things and how personal that is, and that this like specifically the element of craft within fashion revolution as opposed to sustainable initiatives seems something close to what you're saying. So I don't know, do you see that not really a part of a more craft-like challenging of the system? Do you still see that as kind of part of the
No, I
system
mean,
itself?
I agree so much with Kate Fletcher. I mean, so I think she does amazing work. I think there's a few issues that she doesn't deal with in a sense. And first of all, perhaps is like, who has time to do all this craft?
Yeah.
You know, are we producing another system where only the rich can be ethical, the only rich can engage in these beautiful, authentic values of wearing a sweater their whole life or these kind of things? You know, what classes is it okay to come in repair garments to your work and to your social gatherings? You know, where. I mean, it's very easy that I think, you know, the royal families are perhaps some of the most sustainable families on the planet. They've been living in the same castles for generations. It's beautiful, you know.
Shabby chic.
Right, or whatever, you know, they can afford people to sustain their beautiful lives, you know. Whereas, I mean, if I'm homeless, if I grow up, I don't want to inherit my father's sleeping bag or my etc. You know. So it's like, how do we make the transformative potential of fashion available to those who need it really the most? And I think that's really where the sustainable issue is so crucial, and unfortunately so many of our craft-based approaches to that does not address that the people who desperately need fashion to lift themselves and dream, we're locking them out by producing garments in and when Vivienne West would say that you should buy more of my things and have them for a longer time. Why doesn't she have a way, you know, like I can buy cars on, what's called, you pay monthly installments? Yeah, but you know, so why doesn't she work with the bank where I can do those things then? You know, that I can, okay, yes, it's beautiful. I will wear your garment for 10 years and that's where I'm only gonna pay $2 a month or whatever, you know, for your garment. Because right now, it's not accessible, you know, so we need to figure out much better ways than to make these amazing garments then accessible to the people who really need them. But you know, I don't know. Okay.
We have a lot of students here, and I wanted to encourage questions from students who are really actively studying these issues. Don't be shy. That was a great question from Nathaniel.
Well, I thought it was really interesting what you said about this idea of weed, of access to that, because as it becomes legalized in certain states, there's this issue of taxing it, and a lot of these laws have a clause that say that you can have, for example, up to 6 plants in your home for your personal consumption. And the idea that now the tobacco companies are coming back and saying we don't want people to be able to be doing this on their own, and how it's not really the laws. I think in the 21st century in America, it's not the government, it's the corporations who are trying to put strictures on what we can do outside of their sphere of influence. And we especially see that with someone like Jeff Bezos, who is constantly expanding his own agency at the expense of other people's. So, I mean, I think that going forward, that's just going to be a really interesting arena for this sort of battle between corporate power and individual power.
Right, and I think, I mean, we see a similar sort of tension in the Bitcoin and this kind of whole blockchain idealism that we can decentralize everything, but then who actually mines the Bitcoins are these huge and owns most of the Bitcoins is these extreme farms of servers that, you know, consume all these energy, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not a lot of these libertarian ideas of that this type of decentralization will automatically produce some sort of utopian practice is, of course, continuously undermined by already invested interests and powers. You know, but it's really that sort of tug of war in a sense, and then the state exactly tries to sort of still disseminate certain kind of agencies in order to sort of stop a monopoly from developing. At the same time,
we've gotten particularly bad at it recently, but I don't think the state is trying to stop monopolies from developing anymore. And if anything, they're encouraging them.
Mhm.
And it's just been interesting to watch that political shift toward total deregulation only for people who can afford it.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you've been looking into how like state has been using the word craft. In our class, we're really looking at how these terms are being defined, and I just bring this up because core craft is the prison industry labor, like New York State company name, and so core craft produces products like public litter baskets and like benches and things like that, like office supplies. And I'm just and they use the word craft, right? So it's like core and then capital C craft. And if you've like looked into that terminology and how the state has used it versus, you know, all of us today right now are using like craft and like design. So what
Right. No, I haven't. I haven't at all. And I think I've been perhaps also trying to I mean, just both trying to avoid a little sort of discourse analysis in that sense, and also trying to sort of avoid the sort of a Foucaultian total idea that the state is like everything and everywhere, and you know, so I'm perhaps more allied with a little bit more sort of actor network-ish thing, but if you look the agency of stuff, if we imagine that certain things have agency and vibrancy, what I'm going to say, you know, how does my body and my embodied cognition in a sense work together with that? Exactly, you know, just to sort of avoid a little of the what does the law say, in a sense, you know, what you know, but it's really new, so I don't know yet where I'm going. But I think it's a really exciting observation that, you know, so I'm yes. So.
Well, I think
Yeah.
the prison is an interesting example, and it certainly doesn't, as you say, have to be, you know, a Foucaultian exercise there. But what's interesting about that, I think, too, is that in addition to profits, it's also about occupational therapy. I mean, the therapeutic, right, ideology, right, about making those things. And with prisons, one of the key tenets of design is you cannot design anything that can become a weapon. And that's either a weapon to use against, you know, a guard or another inmate, but also for suicide, right? And so that is maybe one of the chief imperatives for people who are actually designing prisons. So it seems like there are some interesting tensions in that context.
Right, and of course sorry, yes.
Sorry, I just like it brings up the idea of like danger, right? And that you're really interested in the idea of danger, but I guess there's just like a lot of different levels of danger in a prison labor system.
Right. Oh yeah. This is a great book about prison invention. It's about, you know, how to make your own, like cooking your own water with the just taking apart this wire, and particularly how to, you know, make weapon replicas out of soap and then shoe shine and these kind of things in order to pretend that etc. But I think what fascinates me is exactly this public dissemination of skills and action spaces, in the sense of where does these ideals of shop class, in the sense of what does this ideal that by making things you live a richer life, where does that knowledge and that ideal come in conflict with other people, and what what powers are out there? But, yeah, yes.
Well, no, I was just going to say, we're at 1:15, but I think if people want to stay, we can. And I saw a question from Peter and from Sasha. So, you know, if you need to leave,
And we
or
have
if you need to leave,
locks here, so we can try out things.
but if you would like
Yeah.
to stay, maybe we could
Pass that
hear.
around.
We could
Oh, yeah,
hear-
well, yes,
Sort of
yes.
send the thing, some of it down.
Please.
Circulate it.
So Peter, do you
Yes,
want to go
sorry,
ahead
Peter,
and
yes.
ask?
So that was really fun and very thoughtful. I was thinking of something in parallel that you didn't talk about, and I'm wondering if you had some light to shed on, or just from your perspective. So there's a lot of interest on the academic side in making as known, right? Where it used to be called experimental archaeology, it began with archaeologists kind of like taking flint and napping it to understand how prehistoric people were done, and extending to all sorts of other kinds of tool and thing making. So now flipping back to the politics, of hacking and craft that you were talking about, going back to the 19th century, how does that work when we come to knowledge? Does it say that all big structures of knowledge are false? But we know that we have to take a lot of things on the faith of other scholars' work, the footnotes operate. So what's the kind of political status, do you think, of experimental archaeology within the disciplines compared to the outsider dimension that you were talking about in the various spheres you discussed?
Yeah, I mean, the experimental archaeology, I've only encountered it through Tim Ingold or something like that, so I cannot unpack too much of that, I think, because I haven't really touched upon it. I'm coming onto this really from a designery perspective in a sense, but I really would love to dive into that and really to sort of also highlight how it's such a long discussion that's been going on for such a long time, and exactly what knowledge claims does it claim? I mean, compared to if we talk today about embodied knowledge and these kind of ideas that, not necessarily tacit, but in the intelligent hands and what Adamson is working on now with these kind of ideas that this is an intelligence of making. And does that necessarily stand against sort of academic systems, or if you want to say, sort of larger traditions, or is this kind of embodied knowledge inherently better in a sense, or is there actually two different perspectives that are clashing, meaning that what I know from my own little experience and my own little horizon, how do I not claim that as the ultimate truth? Meaning that in times of fake news, it means that there's definitely a challenge between bigger historic peer-reviewed etc. knowledge systems versus what we can from my little experience. It looks like the world is going too bad, whatever. The Chinese are taking whatever people are claiming from that little where the fake news operate. So it doesn't necessarily answer your question, but that there is this tension also there that.
As you develop the project, it might be worth this being one of the chapters in it, because it takes your argument and projects it into this other areas. Obviously not unrelated to your own activities as a professional.
Yeah, no, but thank you. Yes, I will pick your brain more about that. Thank you.
Sasha.
I was just, this is more a suggestion you might be interested in. Since you're interested in danger and people enriching or projecting their own values through creating, I was wondering if you had looked at all at resistance movements, like the French resistance in World War II. I know there's a lot of evidence, and they created a lot of things to hold messages and other paraphernalia that to distribute under German occupation, so.
Yeah, no, but right, and the whole, the Samizdat press in Soviet times and these kind of things, but I think I've been trying to, it's really fresh, so I'm trying to sort of why is it not about forgery, about money, or these kind of things, and I feel like, money is automatically also outsourcing it to the economy, so I'm really trying to stay within what does this local agency do in a sense. I'm trying to really get closer to the body, alcohol, and so sometimes things that really pass through my body or very close to it, rather than perhaps the more abstract issues of resistance out there. But I don't know yet. So but thank you. It will be a lot of figuring out what this framework will be about. Thank you. Yes.
I wanted to ask you, this is a very fascinating presentation. I wanted to ask you a question about expertise. It was a term that I kept coming back to and listening to you talk. And it strikes me that there's a sort of tension throughout the various examples that you gave between expertise as an ideal, something to take back from corporate structures, something to take back from patent holders and disseminate back to the people at large, That seemed very much what someone like William Coperthwaite was arguing, the idea that one would create an axe, that you could create an axe without being a blacksmith. You don't have to have that kind of craftsmanly expertise, right? That idea. But at the same time, on the flip side, you sort of see an argument to say that expertise is dangerous, that we shouldn't have expertise. I mean, so I guess my question is, I'm sorry, I'm not articulating this very clearly, specifically for Coperthwaite, where does he fall in the idea of expertise itself? Is it something that is achievable, is a goal, or is it something that we shouldn't pursue? That the goal, that to have a truly democratic path means to have a world of makers, none of whom know how to do it well.
Right. No, he's right. I mean, and I think he doesn't go with the sort of the John Serson anarcho-primitivist track that any type of expertise, or I mean that they build out of Heidegger, that the tool is okay because we have control of it. The technology is not okay because it requires expertise. So as long as it's tools, it's okay. When it becomes technologies, it's automatically undemocratic. And I don't see him going there. I think as I read him, is much more a celebration of indigenous expertise and indigenous knowledge, that there's we should rather look at those traditions. So it's a lot of, he works a lot with sort of different types of indigenous crafts and the ingenuity of especially Inuit crafts that is part of his work. Right, so I don't see him as exactly in the sort of the Serson tradition of that, no. But of course, I mean, and I don't know exactly, should I go into sort of the anarchist traditions in the sense of, what should be kept within the community? I mean, we shouldn't make our own railroads. We're not going to make our own, there's always going to be a compromise, outsourcing to certain types of production and knowledge and expertise, exactly.
Yeah. Or in the argument, the anarchist argument is we shouldn't have the railroad. In a way.
Within certain, yes. No, right. Within certain kind of extreme.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
I have to go teach class until one of my students says
Oh,
but if you want to stay.
No, but thank you guys.